Okay. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this webinar. Thank you very much for coming and joining us this evening. Well, where I am in North London, there are big grey clouds going by overhead, but I think that's probably indicative of the political climate and the, dare I say it, the COVID climate we're in. It's certainly not indicative of the super webinar and our fantastic speaker this evening. We have a great I was almost going to say performance. You wouldn't be able to see too much of the performance if there was. We certainly have a great webinar, a great speech for you from Chris Potter, Digital Audit Partner at PwC. And the topic is, as you know, digital transformation trends. So I'm going to hand over to Chris straight away to give you a little bit of background about himself and tell us about this fascinating subject. So this is Darlene Basu, Chair of BCS North and Central branches, handing over to Chris Potter. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Dylan. And thank you very much indeed for coming to listen. And I'll try not to be too tedious. Actually, life is quite interesting at the moment. And so a bit of background about myself for those of you who don't know me. My name's Chris Potter, and I've been with PwC forever. So I joined back in 1986. And over that time, I've been an accountant. So I've been a bean counter. I've been an IT developer and project manager. I've been a cybersecurity professional. I ran our cybersecurity practice for 4 years over the dot-com boom. And I've been an systems auditor as well, an IT auditor. And for the last 8 years, I've been leading some of our digital transformation of our audit business within the UK. So applying transformation using technology to how we carry out our audits. And so I'll be bringing some of that experience. I spend a reasonable amount of time going out and talking to people about digital transformation and what's going on, and trying to listen to their stories and seeing whether I can learn from what others are doing. And so I'll share a little bit about what's been going on in my world on transformation, but also what's going on in the big wide world at the moment. So, digital transformation trends. What am I going to cover? I'm going to start off by talking a bit about the long-term technology trends. So what was everybody talking about at the start of this year? What kind of things were on the technology transformation agenda? And then clearly COVID has happened. So coronavirus, big impact. But what does that impact mean? And I'm going to share with you some research which PwC has done with global CEOs, really to give you a perspective of what they think might be the long-term impact of coronavirus on their businesses and on their digital transformation. And as with all of these forward-looking things, you should treat with a pinch of salt, because nobody knows what the future is going to be like. But we all try and guess, and we all try and create the future. And so understanding what the consensus mindset is like is often quite helpful. I'm then going to look a little bit about cybersecurity. So what's been going on since COVID and over the course of the last year? What are the trends in the cybersecurity space that will impact us? Because clearly security is a big enabler for digital transformation. If you don't have security and you don't have trust, then you can't really move to using technology effectively. I'm then going to talk a little bit about digital transformation in my world, in accounting and audit, and share with you some of the things which we've been doing in PwC, and warts and all, share with you some of the learning that we've made from our digital transformation journey, which hopefully will help you as you embark on your transformation. And before we take your questions, and please do through the chat facility, please do raise any questions that you would like to be asked, and plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. So before we move to questions and answers, I'll leave you with a few thoughts about some no regrets moves, some thinking that you should probably do in order to position your organization correctly from a digital transformation perspective. So let's start off by looking at some of the long-term technology trends. So, as I said, I joined PwC in 1986, and one of the things which amazes me is how much has changed in my professional career. So here is some US household data, and it just gives an indication that you've almost had two whole waves of technology change in lots of aspects. So picking up 1990, no mobile phones. Then we all went through the phase of having mobile phones, but they were all dumb phones, and now we're all on smartphones. Similarly, no internet, to dial-up, to broadband. Cassettes. Those of you who are old like me will remember cassettes. And then we all moved to CDs, and now everything is digital. And streaming is very much how people consume music now. So I have a cupboard full of CDs, and I think these are obsolete now. And then videotape, so VHS, Betamax, the big war of the 1990s, 1980s. Then by the turn of the century, most things were now on DVD, and now DVDs and Blu-rays really obsolete because people watch video by digital streaming instead. So all of that has happened over the time that I've been working, and it's just indicative of how the world is changing. And as a result of which, we have considerable disruption. And what does disruption mean? Well, it basically means companies failing and new ones coming up. And disruption has always been there. But technological change seems to be accelerating the rate of disruption. And over on the left, a few massive brand names. So if I went back to the 1990s, those were huge, huge brands. And they're all gone, essentially. I mean, not quite gone, but so Nokia is still going in certain respects. Kodak is still around as a brand, but these were dominant in the organizations. And, that disruption has always been there. So if you look at the Fortune 500 companies and you see the same sort of thing with the FTSE, only 12% of the Fortune 500 have stayed in the Fortune 500 from 1955 to 2017. Only 12%. The other 88% are all new. Now, some of that is because they've merged, combined. Some of it is they've been taken over. Some of it is they have gone bust. And what's different is the average stay. The average length of time that companies now stay in the Fortune 500 has gone down from 33 years to 14 years over that period. So we're seeing more rapid turnaround of the major companies. And when you look at the big technology brands in the US, those really weren't that big if you went back to the 1990s. In fact, most of them didn't exist, the likes of Amazon, etc. And I think this is a really good quote, spoken by Justin Trudeau at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2018. Not in blackface, I hasten to add. The pace of change has never been this fast, and yet it will never be this slow again. So when you're in a world which is accelerating, it may seem like you're always going faster and faster and it's tough, but it's always going to get tougher still. And we still see this, that the pace of change just seems to be faster and faster and faster. And of course, COVID has been a big shift in the pace of change that lots of us had to experience. And this is just a chart showing US household data again. And the only thing to note from this chart is that the lines generally get steeper the further to the right you go. So if you compare the pace at which microcomputers went into US households, and you compare that with the rate at which tablets went in, much, much faster to hit 50% penetration. And we see that with social media usage, with smartphones, etc. They move very quickly now. And what's driving all this change? Well, part of it is technology costs are plummeting. So whether it's Moore's law, you're seeing exponential change in the cost of processing power, of storage, and most importantly, of connectivity. So the reason the connectivity is particularly important is through broadband, etc., that has facilitated cloud computing. So we went through an era back kind of before I started work, the world was all about mainframes. And it's all about a central machine with dumb terminals out there. Then we went into a world of client server type stuff, where a lot of the processing power was on the local PC. And you did a lot of things, most recently through things like replication technologies, other things where you could do a lot of your processing locally and then send it to the server. And increasingly, this connectivity explosion has enabled a world of cloud computing where we're back to the central servers that are sitting there and the dumb terminal. It's not quite that simple, but we're seeing more of a move that way because the connectivity is outpacing the speed of computational storage. So in terms of technology trends, one of the sources that I would always recommend people to look at is Gartner. And Gartner produced a report on top 10 strategic technology trends. And these were the 2020 trends that they predicted round about October, November last year. And broadly speaking, those trends can be broken up into two chunks. The ones on the left relate to people and how they use technology, so a kind of experience of technology, whereas the ones on the right are more to do with the technology itself and the world in which we operate. As with all of these things, we wouldn't be the IT industry if we didn't create new jargon. And so a lot of these things are terms or things for things which we already know about. So just to kind of summarize the kind of things that Gartner's talking about, and I recommend having a quick look at this report. It's not very long, but it's a good sense check. Under hyper-automation, what they're really talking about there is a combination of RPA, so particularly connecting legacy systems together, and what they call intelligent business process management software. For those those tools to effectively run batch processes smart. Multi-experience. So that's about being able to use technology to enable the customer to do things in multiple different ways. And I guess smartphone apps is the key one here. And anybody who's been to a pub since lockdown came back out, you probably had to order on an app on your phone to get service at the table. And that's an example of multi-experience, changing the way in which a process can operate through technology. And the NHS Test and Trace app also, a step up from people writing down their names and addresses on a piece of paper for the place where they've been. Democratization, that's all about making technology available to the ordinary person in the business so that they can improve things. And in some sense, this is no different from what people have been messing around with in spreadsheets in Excel for years and years. But in other senses, it is a bit different. There are new tools, technologies that are available to enable people to do things much smarter. So some of the technologies that we've been rolling out in PwC for our people are Alteryx, which is a data manipulation tool, and then Power BI and Tableau. Power BI does a bit of manipulation and some visualization, and Tableau largely does visualization. So data manipulation and data visualization is a key skill for the technologist, but also for the business person of the future. And so these kind of technologies allow you to do citizen-led technology development. So, and also some organizations are also using RPA bots and making those available to people to build their own bots to improve the efficiency, effectiveness of their work. Human augmentation, I guess I've seen less of this, but there are two types which people talk about. There's physical augmentation, where you've got devices which improve your physical ability through the use, whether that's an exoskeleton that allows you to lift things more effectively, or whether it's, my glasses, in a sense, are a form of physical augmentation. But people also talk about cognitive augmentation. So things that will help you to make decisions more effectively. And I guess an example of that a while back was Google Glass. And I know that Amazon are trialing something with Alexa built into your glasses at the moment. Not spectacularly successful so far, I would say, but again, a trend to watch. And the last thing about our experience is we're increasingly demanding transparency and traceability about our data. So who has it? How do we trust that they're going to do the right thing with our data? And Gartner talks about 6 elements of trust. None of that is particularly rocket science. Clearly, GDPR is pretty fundamental for us in Europe. Moving on to our world, some of the things here, the empowered edge, that's really the Internet of Things. Another way of saying there are loads of devices which are producing data from sensors and sending that out across the Internet. The distributed cloud, well, clearly cloud is hugely, hugely important, and almost every organization now has a cloud-first strategy. And that's a huge, huge change. 4 years ago, I was within PwC pushing to do the first cloud implementations. And now, 4 years later, we are, probably 5 years later, we are now absolutely cloud first on everything. And there's been a big shift in most big businesses to embrace the cloud, having been quite hesitant for security reasons in moving that way originally. The distributed cloud, that's the idea that the big cloud providers will do more than just hosting, that they will provide applications, and those applications might actually be distributed out and do some of the processing like client server on the person's machines and not just on the cloud servers. Autonomous things, there we're talking about things like drones. In my world, PwC have successfully used drones to do a stock count on a massive heap of coal, which ordinarily our auditors would have to go along and we'd have to painstakingly do lots of manual measurements to try and work out how much coal there was there. By flying a drone over with the right software, you can take thousands and thousands of measurements, build up a 3D picture, and much more accurately assess how much coal was in the big heap. Practical blockchain. Now, blockchain is one of those technologies where it's been hyped for some time. So the first thing is blockchain is not the same as Bitcoin, which is what a lot of people get caught up with. So it's not just cryptocurrency that we're talking about here. And I guess the practical blockchain is applying blockchain to really solve business problems. So a good example, which is highlighted in the Gartner report, is Maersk and IBM that worked together to produce a blockchain application for tracking shipping containers around the world. And that is now tracking about 50% of all the shipping around the world. It uses that blockchain technology underpinning it. And I guess the big one, which lots of people are kind of working on how to do, is applying blockchain to financial transactions and financial markets. And so if you're looking out over the next 5 years, that may be an interesting trend. The last thing, AI security. I'm going to come back to that, but clearly there's a lot of work going into applying machine learning and artificial intelligence in the cybersecurity space. And technology is also changing the way that people are working. And I think when we talk about digital transformation, we need to remember that transformation is actually about people and people's behavior. It's only a bit about technology. So you've got to think about the culture in organizations. And some of the transformation trends that I see within that, first of all, people try to kill silos in big organizations. There's a natural tendency for people to work in small teams and become quite siloed. And a lot of the cultural change for transformation is about breaking those silos, getting teams of different skills and different outlooks to work together to solve the problem as a whole. You'll find a lot of people talking about fail fast in technology. So the idea that it's, we've always known that 2/3 of software development projects fail, but only a third really succeed and generate the business benefits which were anticipated. And that, when I was doing research in the 1990s, that was the position, and it's not really shifted. So given that, what you want to do is identify which ones are going to fail and do that fast and kill them so that you can focus on the third, which are going to succeed. So that's the idea of fail fast. But at the same time, we all work in organizations which are quite metrics driven. And metrics don't encourage the recognition of failure, because failure is a bad thing. So how do you kind of trade off those things? You do need measures. You do need metrics, because as Peter Drucker, the management guru, was reported to say, what gets measured gets done. So if you don't measure things, if you don't put metrics in, then those behaviors won't happen. But at the same time, you need to make sure that your metrics don't discourage the ability to try and innovate and fail. So a lot of things in organizations are about setting big picture strategic goals and empowering people to get there. And a model which is becoming increasingly common is the idea of leadership at all levels, which is something which the British Army adopt, for example, where instead of the old model where your sergeant would tell you exactly what to do, instead you need small groups to be able to take responsibility, to be empowered to go off towards the overall objective. So it's about trusting people more, less tell, and more infuse, motivate, and empower people to do things. There are lots of other things on the slide, but I think the culture is the most important thing to think about. So that's the world as we thought of it back in the start of the year. And of course, COVID has happened. And it's unprecedented what has happened with COVID. Or rather, it's not completely unprecedented because the Spanish flu, which didn't come from Spain, came from America, I think, back in 1919, that had a similar impact on the world, similar degree of devastation. So, of course, we've done more to try to reduce the death count. So most countries have gone for a more dramatic lockdown. And the extent of a lockdown, the chart on the left shows the impact on GDP of the lockdown. So you'll see the tiny little blip in the middle of the screen. Well, that was the financial crash. And then the massive drop over on the right-hand side is what happened when we locked down the economy for the April to June period. And of course, things have now gone back up, but we're still down on where we were because we're still putting measures in place to control the spread of the virus. The impact on stock markets, big drops in the stock markets, but interestingly different depending on the different markets. So Japan, relatively unimpacted by coronavirus, and that's despite the Japanese having an elderly population who are quite vulnerable to this. So, but Japan has the culture, they don't touch as much. They don't shake hands. All of these cultural things have been quite beneficial. So the markets seem to price that in. So whilst the Nikkei was down, it was down significantly less than the other markets. And then, of course, the Zoom boom we've seen. So video conferencing has really boomed in the period of home working. So I said before that I'd share with you some research on what global CEOs think about coronavirus and how we might emerge from this. And there's lots of material in this survey, but I'll highlight a few points. First of all, it's clear that CEOs plan to make their companies more digital and more virtual. So a key lesson out of the crisis has been that those who have been more digital and virtual have survived better than those who have been very physical. So CEOs generally have picked up on that and thought, well, I want to have my business more resilient in that way. That is the way of the future. And also the flexibility of the workforce. So those organizations who've been able to adapt by having people like me, welcome to my study, work from home, work in a flexible way, that's been very beneficial to organizations. And so CEOs generally plan to be adopting a more flexible workforce in the future. And it's fair to say that the expectation of most CEOs is that remote working, remote collaboration, and automation are definitely things which they expect to be enduring shifts post-COVID. Some of the other trends are a bit more variable, but some CEOs think one thing, other CEOs think the other. But those two, there's quite a strong sense that the benefits of remote collaboration that have come out of COVID will be something which organizations seek to retain. And the quote here on the left from an engineering and construction CEO in the UK is an experience which many organizations have had, that COVID has accelerated what they were doing and shifted them. They've had to do things. So they've had to respond. And when you have a dramatic shift, you move much faster. So there's the old analogy that if you drop a frog into boiling water, it will jump out straight away. If you sit the frog in a saucepan of water and you gently bring it up to boiling temperature, the frog will just stay in the pot. I don't know whether this is true, and no frogs were harmed in the making of this webinar, I can assure you. But the analogy is there that if you have very rapid change, you kind of need to respond to it quickly and move forwards. And that's what a lot of organizations have experienced around the world. So what are people doing to digitalize and virtualize? Well, different sectors can do this more than others. And the ones which have been highlighted as particularly seeking to do this, financial services, what they're looking to do is digitalizing their core processes, their core operations, trying to automate to take as much back office people out as possible. Health industries, if you look at how the pharmaceuticals and health sector operated, they had quite a well-tuned supply chain around speed, around being able to get stuff from one place to another, but do it with limited stock. So because that was highly cost effective. Unfortunately, in a crisis, that's caused problems because there's been insufficient material around to up the volume. And so there's a shift to a focus around supply chain safety. So how do you make sure that you're not contingent on glass vials coming to you from China because they might not be able to be shipped in the way that you were anticipating. So there's a bit of a sense of a shift in the way that people are planning there. And then, of course, if you're in the technology, media, and communications sector, and also to some degree the health industry as well, it's about virtualizing your products and services. So the organizations like the streaming companies, video streaming companies, have had a good time over the COVID period. what do CEOs think about the workplace of the future? Well, there's a broad consensus that the office environment of the future is actually not going to just go back to where it was in 2019. So certainly in my company, we had a lot of hot desking where people would come, use the desk for an hour, somebody else would come use it for an hour. We'd have flexible offices, which were all around people using the office space when they needed it, but then using different office space, all very mobile. And that's not conducive with social distancing. So a lower density office environment is probably where we are headed, at least for the next year. But there's also been quite a behavioral shift. Workers are now used to working from home and have found that they can actually be quite productive at it. And business leaders, rather than thinking, scoffing at people who work from home and saying, oh yeah, they're having a work from home day. Instead of that, they're realizing that actually people can be very productive and people can be geographically dispersed and they can collaborate in different ways in an online environment. And so the workplace of the future is probably going to be quite hybrid. There are certain things where getting people together physically is just so much better. And people talk about the ad hoc water cooler moments, the little chats you have in an office between people. And those are quite valuable in terms of social interactions. And often they lead to things which weren't planned, but turn out to be very useful. And it's quite hard in a virtual world to create those kind of ad hoc interactions. And so you can have virtual social events, but they're not quite as good as playing a game, doing an escape room, having a pizza with colleagues. And so we will adapt, and we'll probably find that when people are going back into the office, they're using that time, that precious time, office space time, to interact as a team. So for team stuff, do it in the office. For stuff which can be distributed out, or where you don't need an intensive team experience, that can be done virtually. So let's move on to cybersecurity and what's going on here. So for about 14 years, I was involved in the DTI survey, as was the phase survey now on cybersecurity breaches. It's always a good read. I recommend it to people. I'm not involved in it at all, so that's not me blowing my own horn. But genuinely, I think it's very useful that the UK checks with companies what's going on out there and tries to make sense of the trends. So these kind of statistics, basically everybody has security breaches, and I guess the big trend is the one over on the right-hand side. That when I was doing the cybersecurity survey back in the early 2000s, the story was all about malware. So it's all about viruses, how people could protect themselves with using firewalls, using antivirus software, and so on. And actually, the world has shifted now. Most attacks now aren't to do with malware. Malware's still there, but it's less common. Most people, significant breaches occurred because of phishing attacks. So this is where people send emails with links purporting to be from somebody you trust, but it actually isn't. It's from a scam from a criminal. Click on the link, and then it infects your machine. And typically, the infection is now around data poisoning, it's around ransomware going into organizations. Infosecurity magazine produces a state of cybersecurity report. Again, worth a read. I'll put a link on here. The 5 key trends that you'll see here. So unsurprisingly, COVID-19, a lot of attacks against the healthcare sector, with people pretending to be from the WHO, for example. And so healthcare professionals quite stressed, receive an email, click on the link. So it's exploiting people who are under stress are most likely to make a poor decision. And so helping people who are in very stressful situations so that they are calm and are protected is pretty important. The cloud we talked about, artificial intelligence, machine learning, I mentioned that earlier, but that's very much coming in both on the defense side, but also worryingly on the attack side in the cybersecurity world. The human element, interesting trends here, and many of these have been trends for some time. So on the plus side, there's increased recognition of the profession of cybersecurity. So the Institute of Information Security Professionals has become the Chartered Institute, a body which I'm a member of and very much recommend. But generally within the UK, there are lots of bodies who are working to try and credentialize and professionalize the cybersecurity profession. But one of the trends which continues to be a problem from a business perspective is there's still a shortage of people with the cybersecurity skills that are needed to protect organizations. And it's still a very confusing technical world for most business people to be able to cope with. And phishing. So a quote here, alarmingly high success rate, yet a relatively low detection rate. And that's why the attack vector is used. Just to give you an idea, ransomware and data poisoning increased significantly since lockdown. So there's a bit of research done by PwC, I'll give you the link here, which looks at how which organizations have been targeted by ransomware and how the cyber criminals are then using the data which they've gathered from penetrated sites. And by the 20th of May, over 150 organizations had their data published on these sites. And the majority of those had occurred after the 11th of March. So there was a big spike in phishing attacks, gathering data, harvesting that data, and also then poisoning the original source data with ransomware. And here are some security breaches of note. So I've called them top 5. Different people may disagree as to them. And I've cheated as well because some of my top 5 actually happened in 2019 rather than 2020. But you'd have to be on the moon to have missed the Twitter hack in July, where people hijacked the Twitter accounts of high-profile US personalities, and then people received a classic Twitter message saying, pay me $1,000 and I'll put $2,000 in your account. So a number of people fell for that and lost their $1,000. Marriott, 5.2 million hotel guests had their security details, personal details leaked. And how was that? Well, it's classic, they obtained the login credentials of 2 accounts of people who had access to customer information, and they then used the information to siphon off the data. And it was approximately a month before that breach was discovered. The MGM data dump, very, very similar, though that probably took place in 2019 and into 2020. Zoom, I mentioned the Zoom boom. I should say that it fairly quickly became apparent that Zoom was not the most secure of platforms. Various unfortunate stories surfaced in the media about hackers breaking into feature presentations, into supposedly confidential discussions, and just being able to drop in. And eventually, it's worse than that. Zoom itself became the victim of a data breach, and 500,000 Zoom passwords were then available on the dark web. And then probably the most disturbing of all is the sad tale of Travelex. So Travelex provides foreign currency transactions for a large number of UK banks, and also themselves directly in airports and in shops around the country. And on New Year's Eve, they got infected by ransomware, and it forced them to take down their websites across 30 countries. And they had a major, major outage. And this had a knock-on impact on the banks who used their services. So it was very difficult to get foreign exchange over that period. And partly as a result of this breach, partly also coronavirus and the general impact on the travel sector, but partly this breach, Travelex went into administration in August. So it's that tale of what can happen if you are impacted by ransomware. And it can be completely debilitating. So I promised to share a little bit about my world and some of the transformation activities we've been doing in PwC. So I'd like to take you back in time to 2011 when we kicked off our digital transformation journey. And we started in a pretty good place. Actually, we were a frog sitting in a pot of water that was kind of lukewarm at best. So life was good. You know, we had the largest market share, best global network. We've been an early adopter of technology. We had a reputation for recruiting and retaining the best people in our sector. That's all great stuff. But one of our fundamental problems was our costs for our audit business were growing faster than our revenue, faster than the money that people were prepared to pay for the audit. And regulatory change was leading to greater proposal activity. Since that date, of course, we had a lot of regulatory change in the audit sector, including mandatory firm rotation. We also found it difficult sometimes to differentiate what we did from what our major competitors would do. And behaviorally, our people were very successful, but also very busy. So what they were doing kind of worked for them, and they were too busy to try and do something different. So that tended to bog down our change initiatives. And our people were also very smart. They were very used to solving problems. And so they would tend to solve problems for themselves. And that sometimes wasn't the most efficient way of doing things. It meant that getting to consistency, getting to standardization was a problem. So what did we try to do? Well, we focused on 4 key objectives. For us, audit quality is absolutely paramount. So there's a danger when you transform a business that you have glitches, that you have problems. We couldn't really afford that. because we're in a tightly regulated market. Nobody wants audit opinions to be incorrect. We needed to improve the efficiency so that we could ensure that we had a sustainable profitability and something that would enable us to reinvest in our audit business and make it better for the future. But we also wanted to create value for our audit clients, in particular for audit committees who have quite a challenging job in making sure that they look after organizations but challenge organizations. So how can we provide insight to those charged with governance within organizations? And we also needed to make it easier for our people, because accountants and auditors have quite a stressful life. They're expected to do loads and loads of things, have lots of regulatory change pushed on them. And we need to be able to relieve some of that pressure and make it better for people. Now, we benefited from some big picture plays. So as a firm, PwC, the network globally, we decided to invest in some big cloud-based solutions. So we moved to using Google. We have adopted Salesforce, and we shifted all our HR processes onto Workday. And those have been very helpful. But those have applied across the organization. For our audit itself, we needed the tools and technology that would actually help our auditors day to day. And there are three key technologies that we've used to drive this forward. I'll take you through what each of those does. So Aura is our electronic file, our audit file, and it's like the ERP system you might find in an organization. It really project managed, drives everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. And it enables our auditors to record their judgments about risks that they see in the audit, and then it uses those to drive the audit process going forwards. And we've invested a lot of time and effort in building consistent libraries of procedures that are industry specific, risk tailored, that effectively slot in as the auditor makes their risk judgments. Connect is our technology that allows us to request information from our clients and enables our clients to then send that information to us securely. And then it project manages, tracks where everything is, and reminds people if they haven't provided the information that's necessary. And this has been absolutely fundamental in a COVID world to enabling us to continue to operate effectively with our clients. The fact that we'd adopted that technology made the transition into remote auditing very straightforward for us. And then Halo is the technology that we use to visualize data. So we extract information from our clients' accounting systems, and we then standardize that data. So we transform that information in the background, and then we have standard audit tests which we can then apply against that data stream. That whole standardized process is something which we've been doing around the world, and as a consequence of that, we've now processed about 500 billion journal entries, i.e. big transactions, from our clients, which is a lot of data, a lot of information about accounting transactions. What big data allows you to do is it allows you to then throw machine learning at it. So can a machine now be trained using all of that data to start predicting what are unusual things? What are things which the auditor might want to look at in more detail? And so we have some innovative technology that applies machine learning to those processes. And we've also been applying machine learning and artificial intelligence to the auditing of cash. So what does the digital audit of the future look like? And I separate this into two pieces. And what we think of digital audit is partly about how do we audit our clients' digital operations, our clients' use of technology. And there are a number of factors there, most of which we've talked about already over on the left-hand side with the impact on the client. One which we haven't talked about is DevOps. And in many organizations, people are increasingly adopting DevOps. And what DevOps is, essentially, is breaking the segregation of duties that you used to find in an IT function between the developers and the operations people. And the idea is that by combining that, you actually get a faster, more responsive, better service to meet the IT needs. The downside is, from an audit perspective, we've often relied on the segregation of duties that the developers couldn't by themselves cause something which was a problem, because the operations team would have to push that into production. If you have a single DevOps team, they can not only develop the thing, they can push it into production. They can do that quite fast. And so potentially they could do something inappropriate. So this puts more emphasis on automated change control software and making sure that there are controls to compensate and operate the controls in a different way from the traditional IT audit way of looking at things. Over on the right-hand side, applying digital techniques to our auditing. So remote auditing, I've talked about. Some of the other trends, electronic confirmations. That's going to be a big change. Historically, auditors have sought evidence from banks, for example, by writing a letter to the bank. The bank would respond with a letter back. And that's third-party evidence that supports what the audit client has said. And that's increasingly becoming electronic. And then another trend, as we saw with the GL.ai application I showed just a second ago, seeing standardization of transactions, which enables you to benchmark, enables you to apply machine learning to them. All of those things are important. And digital learning. Huge change again from COVID is lots of learning programs that we would have done face-to-face have moved to being online. And I've got a couple of kids who are starting work at the moment. All of their induction training has been done remotely, online, on a computer screen. And that's quite different from how most organizations would have done that in the past. That may or may not continue, because I think there is a very real benefit for induction in getting people into physical contact with the people that they're working with. There are lots of challenges that we face with transformation in my sector. And I think in every sector there are these kind of challenges that you'll run into. Some of the challenges that we face is lack of standardization around the world. So there's a huge difference between UK accounting standards that we apply and Belgium, for example. In Belgium, everything is very prescriptive. You write specified numbers on every line of a specified schedule. In the UK, accounts have much more latitude to tell the story in the way that the directors of the organization feel is appropriate. It makes it much harder to automate anything in that area. Other challenges, we need to be able to preserve data. We need to be able to share that data with regulators and with lawyers. And then from a client side, I've mentioned cybersecurity as being a huge trend. I've also mentioned that our audit is driven by our clients giving us their data. a lot of our clients, quite rightly, are concerned about whether we as an organization will keep their data secure. So increasingly, we need to make sure that we can communicate appropriately how we secure people's data, how we keep it protected, so that they give us permission to be able to extract their data and use it after the audit process. And of course, a big thing with audits at the moment is there is a lot of debate about what is the audit of the future? What is the value of the audit to clients and to society as a whole? And it's really important that when we are doing our transformation activity, that we're transforming our business in a direction which is consistent with what society wants from the audit of the future. So how far can we go? With things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, what's the limit here? Well, I could give you the science fiction answer. So in 50 years, machines will be smart, they'll be making judgments. But realistically, for the next 10 years, the auditor's judgment is going to be very much a human thing. And what we're going to see is the use of machine learning techniques to be able to filter large volumes of information to highlight the most important things to the auditor. And that's incredibly valuable because you can take an audit from a sample-based exercise where somebody might be looking at, say, 100 transactions and trying, based on that, to extrapolate what 100,000 transactions said, to a situation where a machine can look at every single one of those 100,000 transactions and highlight to the auditor the 20 or 30 ones which are most risky for the auditor then to form their judgment on, to look at it in detail. And that means a complete paradigm shift in the way that audits are done and the value that they provide to the organization. So we're likely to see a lot of that. And what are the lessons? What are the key lessons that we've learned? Well, first of all, transformation has been successful. We did change the profitability of our practice so that we have been sustainable over the period. And it's also helped us improve the quality of our work and to win new audits over that period. It's been much harder to achieve insight for people. And that's because when you standardize a process and produce insight, well, that's insight for a bit, but then it's not insight anymore. And it just becomes the process. So you continually have to be creative to think of new things. And then the other lessons, the behavioral lessons, and I think these are generally applicable to anybody who's trying to do digital transformation. Changing behavior is really hard, and especially hard in organizations that are busy and successful. And we have suffered from that over the years, and getting consistent adoption and consistent quality is something that we put a lot of effort into as a result of that. Technology helps, but you won't achieve transformation through technology alone. So digital transformation is as much about the people as it is the technology. And for us, metrics, measuring and challenging, have been absolutely key. In the first year when we tried to do transformation, we didn't have any measures, we didn't have any challenge. We got to the end of the year and nothing really had changed because of change fatigue, inertia within the business. All the great things that we produced didn't really make an impact. And it's only really by measuring the adoption and really challenging people that we've been able to progressively, dramatically change how we work. So I'll leave you with a few no regrets moves when you're thinking about your digital transformation. So first thing is, make sure that you're thinking about transformation, thinking about your digital journey in an intelligent way. What that means, what we think that means anyway, is combining technology innovation, but combining it with business understanding and also human and behavioral insight. So you need to have all those three elements together to be in that sweet spot of digital transformation success. And think about some key questions. So we use the phrase reimagining the possible. Some people get that, some people go, that's weird. But think about what the world might look like. Where do you want to go? So a few key questions here, 6 key questions. Big data. So what are your data assets? People. How are you going to handle those in this digital world? Technology. How are you going to use that in a good way so that your value to society is clear in the future? Cybersecurity threats. Are you thinking about those? How are you protecting yourself? What's most important to you? And then how do you accelerate the impact of your digital investments? And how do you learn from this shock experience that we've had with COVID to make sure that that pace of technology innovation is maintained? And finally, we live in an incredibly disruptive world, and that pace of change is never going to be slower again. So how do you make this disruption work for you? So going back to one of the things that we saw earlier, story of Blockbuster. Blockbuster, hugely successful in the 90s, massive business. They had an opportunity to buy Netflix when Netflix was tiny. Now, where is Netflix? Where is Blockbuster? So how do you make sure that you're looking forward for what could disrupt your business, even if you've got a really successful business today? So a few thoughts, and I've talked, as usual, for far too long, and I'll be very interested in any questions that you have.
Okay, so if people can send their questions to us, then we will start going through those.
Yeah. David, hi, can you hear me? This is
Yes.
Dalim. Chris, I am very interested in one of the early things you said, which is in terms of location, because Canary Wharf, for example, has got a huge population and it's growing like crazy and so on. But all of this COVID period puts a huge question mark over our big technology cities, doesn't it? Do you think that part of the rethinking we have to do is how we can redeploy those and start having much more dispersed living at the edge, I suppose, situations for our work?
Yeah, I think this is quite a big shift, and it's difficult to see the world staying the same as it is now, because the pendulum's all the way the other way. But it's also hard to see that the pendulum will shift all the way back again. So probably, it's going to be somewhere in between. It's probably going to be maybe 50% capacity of those buildings of what they used to be. Now that might still be quite a thriving community, but there will be lots of knock-on impacts. You know, the sandwich shops will be selling 50% of what they used to. So those villages will be a bit less vibrant. But I think the feel that we were getting from the PwC world was that actually we might be heading towards that kind of 50% occupancy type level. I think it would be a brave organization to move away from physical buildings completely. I'm not sure that's the right model for all organizations. I mean, there's certain sectors where you absolutely have to have physical stuff. There are other sectors like mine where you don't really have to have it. But there are quite a lot of benefits from having space. But every organization needs to look at that for themselves. And when you look at communities which are largely built up around virtual businesses, so things like financial services, Canary Wharf is really a financial services hub. Is there any reason why those people all need to be physically congregated together? There's probably less reason than there used to be. So I think there will be a shift that is permanent, but I don't think it's going to stay as dramatically shifted as it is today.
Okay, thank you. David, we have some other questions coming in.
Yes, the first question is about the presentation. So next week it should be available on YouTube and you will receive the link through Eventbrite. I've got a question from Mustafa. Where will the digital transformation disruption end, and will this pose a threat to humans?
Oh yeah, so we can now get into Skynet and Terminator stuff. I don't know, this is the kind of classic existential thing. And on the one hand, the machine learning technology is incredibly clever. On the other hand, it's not really very clever at all. So there's a kind of brilliant thing which DeepMind, one of the Alphabet subsidiaries, did with deep learning, which was to train it how to play Breakout and Space Invaders perfectly. And absolutely brilliant. So much better than a human. But on the other hand, if you changed one pixel on the screen, it completely destroyed it. So it had learned to do something very, very specialized. And this idea of general AI, of a machine that has as much intelligence as its creators, is a fair way away. There's a lot of people who think that this might be possible in due course. And there are various scenarios that come out of it. I'd recommend a book called Life v 3.0, because that's quite good at examining some of the trends in machine learning and gives you some kind of possible sci-fi type scenarios. The most benign of which I think involves the super intelligent machine buying up all the assets of the planet and then being a benign dictator. That's as good as it gets if you have super intelligent machines which are better at everything than we are. So you can get into, you know, dark territory. All of this is quite a long way away and quite uncertain. So I wouldn't be worrying about Skynet today. That having been said, if anybody did put machine learning too far onto nuclear missiles, I would be concerned.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question from Tim. It's quite a long one. How about the government and digital transformation? They didn't appear in your chart. Their approach of what's the user need, where digital transformation supports the changing workflows rather than being a goal of its own, seems like a more valuable and measurable approach to improving organizations.
So I think user experience is really important to doing things, but at the same time, most disruption is not done based on asking customers what they want. So if you go back to the classic disruptor Henry Ford with his car, if he'd asked customers of transport what they wanted, they would have said, "I want a faster horse," and they wouldn't have said, "I want a car that's going to break down." Why would I want that? A horse is nice and reliable. I know what I'm doing with a horse. I just want a faster one. So you've got to take a bit of a balance. So I think it's really important to improve the effectiveness and the experience of people as part of transformation. Absolutely fundamental. But at the same time, sometimes your people will be quite tactical. You'll make small improvements in the stuff that you do today. And what you'll miss is, what Blockbuster missed is the thing that's hurtling at you from the left field. And you need to have somebody looking at that as well.
Okay, thank you. A question from Philip. Should the rise of misinformation and conspiracy theories be considered a strategic security threat?
Yeah, I mean, the world we live in is quite, there's a lot of misinformation, but it has always been the case that people believe what they want to believe. So if you give a set of facts, the same facts, to two different people, they will select the facts that match their world beliefs rather than sitting back and analyzing things objectively. And we need to recognize that as humans, we are massively biased. We're biased by our beliefs that are built up over a long period. We have learned things. And not all of those things are good. So it is worrying the amount of misinformation there is on the internet. And that can have consequences on people's behavior, which effectively can then threaten organizations. But these things have always been there. The difference, the internet moves stuff around faster. You can get faster shifts, and that can be harder to control as a result of the internet.
Okay, thank you. A question from Tom. Do you master quantification of all critical values and qualities, or is there a limit to quantification?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. We try to quantify things, but if I take an audit, for example, it's an incredibly complicated project, and there are lots of moving parts in it. And if I think I've got a great process that's going to save 10% of the time, if I compare this year's time with next year's time, I might expect to see a 10% saving. But I'll never see that because there's so many other factors going on in the delivery of our audit that my simple metric will just get crowded out by the noise. So we tend to use metrics, but as a guide. So we can use metrics that we try to think will measure what the behavior of the people is. And then we'll talk to people as well. So I think you've got to have a mixture of qualitative feedback and quantitative feedback to work out what's actually going on in your business.
Okay, thank you. Dalim? We don't have any more questions at the moment. And Dalim's on mute.
No,
Hi.
I'm not. I'm sorry. I've woken up now. Can I ask you one, please, Chris? I've just come out of uni, hugely entertaining. Learned some great things, and now I've got two job possibilities. One is from an organization, oh, like yours, big, boring, stuffy organization, and and the I'm ex-PwC, by the way, so I don't entirely mean it. And the other is from this bunch of kids, and they're promising me all sorts of things. They don't seem to have a address about where they work from. They don't seem to have anything in particular, other than they keep mentioning things relating to the dark and the dark web and tools you can get easily and so on, and becoming rich quick and fantastic things like this. What would you advise, Uncle, in terms of which one should I go for?
Well, okay. So first of all, everybody is different. But what I would recommend above all is making sure that any organization you work for has integrity and has ethics and will treat you fairly as an employee. And I think you want to make sure that you are doing work that you are passionate about, that you believe is making a positive difference to the world. Because in the long term, that's the stuff which will get you out of bed for 30, 40 years. I would always be a bit suspicious of get rich quick schemes because they tend to end badly.
Good answer. Of course. What was the underlying thing is, what on earth are we going to do about the way that people on the dark side are advancing their techniques, their skills, and so on? And it's a constant battle, a constant war. Can you suggest ways that we can motivate people to come to the light side, not the dark side?
I think it's really important that we build professionalism into cybersecurity so that we have a respected community of cybersecurity specialists that are not just thought of as techie geeks, but are really valued for the positive contribution which they make to keeping people safe. A bit like, in the UK, at least the police have a good reputation for keeping us safe. The fire service, the NHS, it's like a national religion for us. And we kind of want cybersecurity to have that same kind of reputation within organizations because it makes our lives possible. And as soon as you get a cybersecurity breach, as soon as the bad guys do poison the data or shut down the service, then life can't carry on in the same way. And things that we take for granted these days are dependent on cybersecurity. So we as a society need to respect that. We need to value the people who decide to be the white hat rather than the black hat hackers.
Thank you. David, back to you for some other questions.
Okay, related to that, we've got a question from Michael. As a cybersecurity uni student currently looking for placements, what would you say is the most important thing when looking for placements?
First of all, make sure you're getting paid. Don't take an unpaid internship. They're evil. I think that people who do work in organizations should be paid. That's personal view, not necessarily PwC view, but a piece of advice. Secondly, I think look at experimenting. If there's something that you're passionate about doing, then go and try it out. And you'll discover out of that either you are still passionate about doing it when you do it for real, or you're not. And if you're not passionate about it, an internship, a placement is a low risk way of finding out the very valuable information that that's not for you for the long term. Much better than taking a full-time job in a role and then working out after a year that you can't stand it. So I think do a placement, go with your passion on things, and make sure you're getting paid.
Great. Dalim, how much time do we have left?
I think we're good to run for about another 10-15 minutes. By the way, everyone, if you feel you need to go, then please do, because we've overrun our allocated time, but it's so interesting. We are continuing because I notice quite a lot of people are still here. So please continue, David, and of course, Chris, for 10-15 minutes, if you're okay to do so.
Okay, so the next question is from Chucks. From your surveys and experience, what impact do you think multi-enterprise relationships have on digital transformation? This is considering that each organization in a multi-enterprise relationship would prioritize protecting its business interest.
Yeah, this is one of the big trends, and I haven't talked about it, but it's a really good point, is we have seen over the last 15 years that the internet has facilitated a huge trend towards outsourcing and offshoring. And so that kind of multi-enterprise servicing with some quite complex supply chains, some quite complex arrangements. One of the challenges with outsourcing and offshoring is that the different organizations may have different business objectives. And when you put them all together, that might not achieve the best end route through. And so I think you do need to stand back as part of transformation to say, actually, have we overcomplicated life? And we may have had a very good business reason for doing it in this way, but is that actually going to fit with the way that things are transformed? An example in PwC world is I was responsible for about 4 or 5 years for our offshoring of our audit hours. And we grew that significantly from about 6% of our audit hours to about 15% of our audit hours being spent from the UK to India and Poland. We have very big, capable teams in those locations who do some of the standardized no judgment work. And that's great. It was a cheaper way of doing it, but also we got better quality out of it because we put it into centralized functions who did that work day in, day out, as opposed to a person doing a task once a year or whatever, and they weren't very good at it. So it was great for our business model. But as we increasingly automate those activities, we're finding that some of those hours come back onshore as we do that automation. So I think you need to be examining all of your sourcing arrangements with your suppliers, with your providers, and making sure that they're appropriate and fit for your business of tomorrow, operations of tomorrow, and not just for how you structure things yesterday.
Okay, thanks. We've got a question from Matthew. I'm wondering how digital will affect auditors' approach to audits, not the tech they use, but the need to audit digital innovation. For example, the PwC mantra, reimagining the possible, and the audit of risk in that context.
Yeah, it's quite a big challenge keeping up with what organizations do and making sure that it's being done in a controlled, safe way. Because part of innovation is trying to do things fast and sometimes failing. And that's a little bit contrary to the sort of traditional view of internal control. So I think people have to go into audit in a curious way. Fundamental to a good audit is understanding the business and understanding how the business is being done, how it's operating. And I think in an age of unprecedented change and transformation, there's more and more onus on the auditor to really understand what's going on in terms of how the business operated. Because actually, even in 1 year, the business could change substantially from how it was operating at the start of the year to how it's operating at the end. And we as auditors need to understand that. And that's really interesting. I mean, that's why I got into audit many, many years ago, was because I'm a bit nosy. I'm interested, I'm curious. I like to understand how businesses operate. I like to understand how people think, how everything works. And that for me is what the heart of a good audit is. So I think provided you do that, you can then understand and then ask the kind of idiot questions, right? So you're doing all this, how do you control it? How do you make sure it doesn't go wrong? How do you make sure that somebody doesn't put wrong transactions in? And you ask those questions and people will give you answers and you evaluate whether those answers are sensible or not. And that challenge process is, I think, really good because sometimes you ask the questions and people go, yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, we don't know that. And then you have to dig into it and find out. And sometimes you uncover things which management didn't realize, and that can be very valuable for the organization if you catch those.
Okay, great. We've got 2 questions remaining. How can organizations cope with cyber attacks and cyber criminals, as sometimes cyber attackers are one step above? Which tools can be used against cyber attacks and how can they be tracked?
So it's a huge challenge, and I think particularly for smaller organizations, it's a real challenge. I work with a charity on the audit committee for a charity, and they were hit by a ransomware attack, and it kind of completely knocked them for six at the time. And it's really difficult if you're a small organization with tens of employees rather than thousands to be able to be up to date with all the protective techniques. So I mean, I think there are anti-ransomware tools, and it's worth making sure that you've got those. It's worth making sure that you're training people to look out for phishing. It's worth making sure that your email system will identify spam type stuff well. So some of the tools like Google, for example, really good now at filtering out this stuff so it never reaches the user. So think about whether you ought to be moving to a cloud-based email rather than in-house. So there are various things where even in a small organization, you can leverage the strengths that other organizations bring and protect yourself through those kind of things.
Okay, our final question is from Mustafa again. How can you convince an organization to invest in digital transformation effectively rather than selectively?
Oh, yeah, selective and effective. Yeah. I think you need to do both, actually. I think you do need to be selective in what you do, because if you fight too many battles on too many fronts, you just confuse people and you don't actually change behavior. So you need some focus so that people will change their behavior in those areas. We looked at behavioral change for audits, how we would improve quality, and there were lots and lots of things. And we boiled that down to 3 particular behaviors we want people to exhibit day in, day out. And we remind people of those behaviors in everything that we do, whether it's performance appraisals, whether it's presentations they hear from leadership, whether it's spot recognition awards, whatever else, comes back to those three behaviors because that's what we want to do transformatively. So I think you need to really think hard about what you want to focus on, but be selective, and then you need to communicate and communicate and communicate and communicate against those things that you want to do, so that everybody remembers, yeah, we're doing those three things. And they might get bored of the fact that you're talking about those three things and only those three things, but those three things will then become understood and will become, yeah, of course we're doing that. And it's all about changing people's behavior. Very little of it. Technology is a huge facilitator of that. But at the end of the day, organizations run off people, and you have to take the people with you. You have to be able to persuade them that this is important and this is what we're doing.
Chris, we've reached the end of our time, but we've just had a final question. Are you happy to take it?
Yeah, of course.
Go for it, David.
Okay. With the emergence of more IPv6, blockchain, IoT, and 5G implementation that will connect all devices, how do you think we will be able to control and treat the big amount of false alerts?
Well, yeah. I think this is one of the roles where machine learning. So again, I was talking about how we use it in audits to filter millions of transactions and highlight the top 10 things. And I think one of the key roles for machine learning will be to try and separate the noise from the important things. And so that's a huge trend, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, that was fantastic, Chris. Thank you very much. And also thank you, David, for being our technical controller for this session. Chris, though, you've been a good friend of ours for many years, and I always appreciate your technical expertise and your support. So again, thank you very much for this. I take heed of what you've said about how things work in today's world, your COVID experiences, and the use of Aura, Connect, and Halo within your organization. Very interesting indeed. Also, the phrases that I'll remember from this is your encouragement about measuring and challenging, and of course, reimagining the possible. I think we'll have to do quite a lot more of that coming up. And we look to people like you to lead us through and give us great ideas in these challenging times to come. Thank you very much, Chris Potter.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if you're still listening, thank you very much for being with us. Hope you've enjoyed it. Look out for the presentation, that's to say the video of the presentation later on from the website. Thank you and goodbye.